and grade profile, right? And now we know that uh, a compensation grade and grade profile is an important aspect of employees' compensation, right? So every employee, every contractor to whom we have assigned compensation in Workday, he would have a compensation grade and grade profile associated with him, grade or grade profile, right? Um, so not all grades would obviously have grade profiles, but then as I've mentioned already, at least I have seen in all the projects I have dealt with, uh, all the organizations they have grades with grade profiles details as well, right? So probably some very small companies who have implemented Workday may be based out of a single office and they do not have a complex compensation structure, maybe don't need to do a lot of localization. There's just one location they are based out of. Probably they might want to just have compensation grades. So they might have a structure wherein there are only compensation grades without any grade profiles, right? But then as I mentioned, at least I have seen all my projects with grade profile configuration. Okay, now uh, so when you assign a grade and a grade profile to a worker, it basically identifies or allows me to then identify what should be the range within which that employee's compensation should be represented, right? What should be the minimum and the maximum compensation range, right? Okay. Uh, a grade profile itself doesn't give any dollar value to an employee, right? It is only presenting a reference range within which his compensation should be assigned, right? The actual compensation for an employee is represented in terms of the different plans that have been assigned to the employee, right? So this is this employee's base pay range, 200,000 to 400,000 US dollars, with a midpoint of 300,000 US dollars. But then this is only telling me that Steve Morgan's compensation should ideally be in this range, right? Now, what is his actual compensation? It is being represented in terms of all these plans that have been assigned to the employee, right? So he has a salary plan, he has an allowance plan, he has a merit plan, a bonus plan, stock plan, right? Okay, now the actual compensation or the dollar value is then assigned to these plans. Okay, we'll talk about one other compensation guideline component, which is compensation grade steps, right? Now, before we talk about compensation grade steps, we'll talk about the first plan type in Workday, which is the salary plan. Now, you'll find that salary plan is one of the simplest plan that you can assign to an employee in the system, right? Because on a salary plan, and I'm going to open it now, you don't define any of the compensation components, right? Let me go ahead and show you. So if I open this general salary plan, which is the name of a compensation plan, the plan type is salary, right? And let me go ahead and open this. Okay, so if you see on the plan itself, which is of type salary, right? I only have a very limited information defined, right? I have not defined any currency value. I have not defined any amount value. I have not defined any frequency or any other aspect. If I open, for example, this plan, which is car allowance, which is of type allowance, and let me go ahead and open it. On the other hand, if you see this plan, it is much more complex in the sense I'm defining the amount, I'm defining the currency, I'm defining the frequency, and a lot of aspects, right? Okay, so the question would be, when this plan is assigned, or when this salary plan is assigned to the worker, how is system identifying that the currency is US dollars and the frequency is annual, as well as the dollar assignment for this plan? Because as we have seen, none of those values are defined on the plan itself, right? Unlike, for example, your allowance plan, which has all these aspects defined. Okay, first let us create a salary plan, and then we'll talk about different aspects of this plan. And then we'll go ahead and use that plan to then define our compensation steps, right? Okay, so the task for creating a salary plan is create salary plan. Okay, uh, let me go ahead and open that task. So the task, as I mentioned, is create salary plan. We'll talk about what is a period salary plan and unit salary plan later. For now, I'm looking at a salary plan. So again, just like every other compensation component, I would give an effective date to my plan, right? And let's call this 2010. Okay, now if you see, these are the only components that I need to define. So obviously I would give a name to my plan, and say, Feb, let's call this 20 underscore salary plan, right? I'll define the eligibility criteria on the plan, right? I would define the compensation element on the plan, right? Now here, if you see, unlike my compensation grade, and if I go ahead and open my compensation grade, the compensation element that I'm assigning is called a base pay element, right? Here, if I open it, you see that I basically have the option to assign the same compensation elements which I was able to assign as on the compensation grade as well, right? So the question is, why is this compensation element Workday is labeling as base pay element? Okay, we'll come to that part. For now, because my salary plan is part of my basic salary or my basic pay, I am going to assign it to a compensation element called base pay, right? But as I mentioned, if you see, I can actually assign it to any other compensation element which is available in the system, right? Okay, next, apply FTE percentage, right? Now, what is this FTE percentage? This FTE percentage, if I look at, uh, let me open. Okay, now I'm sure since you guys are already working in HCM, you already understand what is the FTE. So this equates, or this is basically the full-time equivalent. System identifies what is the actual working hours uh, assigned that employee should be working based on the location, and then what is the actual work hours that this employee is working, right? So I'm occupying a position wherein I'm supposed to work 8 hours a day, but then I'm only working 4 hours, and system automatically calculates my FT percentage to be 50%. Uh, if I'm working 6 hours, it would automatically calculate my FT percent to be 75%, right? Let me go ahead and show you. I think there are a few employees I have. Uh, mm, so this is one of the employees I have hired. Okay, the FTE percent of this employee is 50%. And why is this the case? Because at the time of hiring, uh, if I go to the worker history, there's just one record or just hire process that has been initiated for the worker. If I go to the job details, the scheduled working hours for this employee is 20, and the actual default working hour that this employee should be working is 40, right? So based on that, system has automatically calculated that his FTE should be 50%, right? Okay, now if I go ahead and initiate compensation for the employee, so if I go to compensation, and where is compensation? And initiate compensation change for this employee. Okay, so if I assign him a salary plan, and let me assign any of the available plans, there's a task which is called compensation plans, which allows me to basically go ahead and check all the plans which are configured in the system. So I open this task or this report, right? So it shows me all the plan types in compensation which Workday supports. If you see, you have salary plans and hourly plans, and then period salary plans, and and many other plan types. And then it also shows me all the plans of that type that have been created, right? Okay, let me go in here, and I think I have created some salary plans for other batches. So I'm assigning WB salary plan, and I am giving him a value of, let's say, 200, and system automatically prorates that value to 100, right? The reason is this employee, his full-time equivalent is 50%, and based on that, system is automatically prorating whatever compensation that has been defined to an employee to 50% of the defined value, right? So I change it to 500, and system automatically prorates the amount to 250, right? Excuse me, guys. Okay, so you apply FT percentage, and system would automatically prorate the value of that plan based on the employee's full-time equivalent when this particular plan is assigned to an employee. Okay, the next checkbox that needs to be selected is exclude from merit, and it is part of the some section which is process eligibility. Now, when you initiate a merit review for an employee, right, and we'll talk about that when we are looking at the advanced compensation, right? So ultimately, uh, the merit increase that I get, or the merit increase that has been assigned to me or determined for me. So let's say uh, the merit increase that my manager is modeling for me is 10%, right? Or my bonus is 100%. Now, how does system know on what basis this 10% should be calculated, right? So is it 10% of $100 or $1,000 or $50,000, right? So system automatically includes all the base pay components of an employee to be considered for determining the merit increase of an employee, right? So it will automatically include, let me repeat that. So Workday, right? And we'll, this is an aspect we'll talk about in much more detail later. So Workday uh, uh, determines, so ultimately what is a merit increase? It changes my base salary, right? So whatever hike or appraisal I get, it updates my base salary, right? So Workday determines all the compensation components or plans that are assigned to base pay, right? Or base pay compensation elements to calculate the merit percentage of employee, right? So that is the default setting. So every plan or salary plan or any other plan which is assigned to the base pay elements, system would include that for determining the merit uh, review of the employee, right? However, if I want, I can exclude certain plans, and you'll find this checkbox not only on your salary plan but also on a few other plan types, right? So I can remove them from my merit process, right? So for example, I was working on one of the compensation requirement for Russia. Now they had two salary components. One was their normal salary plan, but then the team had also created another plan which was called additional salary Russia, right? Now this was also a salary plan assigned to the employee, but then uh, the team did not wish to include this additional salary plan for determining the merit increase, and that is why on that plan or that plan type had been excluded from the merit process, right? So there may be scenarios when certain salary component it doesn't form the base salary of an employee, then you would exclude it from the merit calculation, right? So how that calculation happens and all those aspects we'll talk about in detail later. Okay, and final component is obviously my eligibility setting. So finally, I'll define the eligibility criteria. This being a salary plan, I would ideally want to assign it to all my employees, right? I would create a hourly plan for my contractors or right, we have an option to create allowances, but then this was a specific example I was talking about. So in certain scenarios and in certain countries, this is not common in India, right? So India, you would have your basic salary and then all these allowances, your HRA, your PF, your LT, and all that stuff. But then in certain geos, they want to configure some of these plans or some of these allowances as your salary plan, but then
Okay.
because there's already a salary plan assigned, they would not want to consider as your basic, right? And this was a very specific requirement for Russia, right? But then as you mentioned, it is correct. Any of my additional component, I would ideally want to configure them as allowances, right? And this is true for most of the countries that I have dealt with.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, now there are two questions here, right? And something I asked earlier as well. So when I have not defined any frequency to this plan, when I have not defined any currency to this plan, how is Workday determining those values, right? Okay, now if I go back to request compensation change, if you see Workday defaults the currency value for the plan, right? It should ideally default the frequency as well. There's an issue with this tenant. It doesn't show me that section on compensation grade and grade profile. I'm still trying to fix it. This tenant, if you see, I do not even have authorization for this. So there's some issue with this tenant. Uh, Once I fix this, so ideally, as I mentioned, system would automatically define or default the frequency as well, the way it has defaulted the currency of the worker, right? But the question is, how is system identifying what should be the currency and what should be the frequency which is assigned to this salary plan, right? Okay, now this is where the compensation grade and grade profile comes into picture, right? Now, this employee, Steve Morgan, he has been assigned this particular grade and this particular grade profile, right? Now, the currency which is associated with Steve Morgan's grade profile is US dollars, and the frequency which is associated with this grade profile is annual, right? And that is why when I assign Steve Morgan a salary plan, and it could be any salary plan. So if I go ahead and assign him a different salary plan now, system would still default to him the frequency of annual and the currency of US dollars, right? So the currency and the frequency, again, there could be some other employee who has been assigned this grade, and maybe some other grade profile within this grade, maybe India grade profile, right? Now the currency of India grade profile is INR and frequency is annual. In that case, if I assign that employee this very salary plan, system would allocate him or assign him the currency of INR and not US dollars, right? So system checks the grade and the grade profile that has been assigned to the employee, checks the frequency and the currency that has been assigned to the grade profile, and then uses it as a default when the salary plan is assigned, right? Now for this case, because none of these components have been assigned, system is actually defaulting US dollars as such and not able to determine the frequency. Okay, now what is the second aspect that I was talking about? Now, why is that system considers this compensation element on the compensation grade as the base pay element, right? So now the second aspect is the compensation element which is assigned on the compensation grade or grade profile, whatever is the configuration. So if I go ahead and edit it, right? So this is a grade profile I'm editing, right? And instead of standard base pay, if you see, I can assign my employee any of the compensation elements, right? The same as on the salary plan, or in fact, any of the plans which I'm going to create in future, right? Now, how does system determine what is the base salary of an employee, right? So for example, Steve Morgan could be assigned 10 different plans. Let's say for India employees, our HRA is also considered our basic salary, right? Many of the times. Then how would system know that HRA should be the basic salary for India employees, but not travel allowance, even though both of them are created as allowances, right? So again, so I have two different allowances. So let's say a given employee, I have assigned him a salary plan, right? I have assigned him an allowance, which I'm calling it allowance one, and maybe I have assigned him 10 different allowances, right? Now, how would system know that salary plan and allowance one and maybe allowance two, these three are the basic salary of an employee, right? System would know that based on the compensation grade that has been assigned to the employee. So the compensation element that you define on the compensation grade, if you see, it is called a base pay element. So system would check the compensation element that has been assigned on the compensation grade or grade profile of the employee, then check all the plans that have been assigned to the employee, and then match the compensation element of those plans with that on the grade, right? Again, so I have the compensation grade, let's call it CG underscore India. The compensation element on this grade is base pay, right? Now system checks the compensation element which is defined on all each of these plans. So on salary plan, I have defined the compensation element as base pay. On allowance one, I have defined the compensation element as base pay, and allowance two as well. Let's assume I have defined it as base pay. On all others, I have defined uh, different compensation elements. So maybe this is allowance one, and now system, as I mentioned, compares the compensation element that has been assigned to the compensation grade or grade profile of the employee, and then matches this compensation element with the element that has been defined on all the plans of the employee, right? And then wherever this element matches, system then considers those compensation plans as the basic salary or the base pay of the employee, right? So again, let's say I have another salary plan, the same example I took. Let's say I also have additional salary Russia, right? This is some Russian employee, right? The element that has been assigned is additional salary element, right? Now again, because this salary plan, even though this is a salary plan, the element that has been assigned to the salary plan is not the one which is defined on the grade of the employee or the grade profile of the employee. This would not be considered as the basic salary of the employee, right? And that is why the compensation element which is defined on the compensation grade or grade profile, system is labeling it as the base pay element, right? Else if you see, these are exactly same to the elements that we have defined or will be defining on any other plans. So whether it is one time payment plan or salary plan or allowance plan or any other plan type, you see that I'm able to assign the same set of elements. Okay, makes sense. Any questions? Okay, so
No,
apply. Mhm. Yeah,
no,
all right. Okay, thank you. Apply FT percentage, right? So what is this? Uh, Select this checkbox to prorate compensation for employees assigned to uh, this salary plan, right? Based on their FTE percentage or full time equivalent percentage, right? Again, I would assume that you guys are already aware of this full time percentage assignment. If I go ahead and correct this hire for the employee and go to this additional information section, this is where, so if I change this 20 to let's say 60, the full-time FT automatically changes to 150%, right? So system checks the scheduled hours for the employee and then compares it with his default weekly hours and then automatically updates the FT value, right? Okay. Uh, okay. So we spoke about apply FT percentage. The next one is your exclude from merit, right? So the plan amount is not considered for uh, the plan amount uh, is not considered when you initiate and process the merit process for employees assigned this. Okay, guys, apart from this FT percentage, which is basically uh, the default FTE, there are two other FTs that is actually an enhancement which Workday delivered. I'm not sure if you guys have already gone through it. So I think in Workday 32, Workday deliver two other FT values. One is paid FT. Let me quickly show you. So there's this task which is called maintain localization settings, and you use this for a lot of configuration options, right? In this, if you go to, I think, staffing, mm, yeah. So there's this concept called paid FT, right? So for example, uh, now if I select paid FT, and for example, I enable it for, let's say, uh, let me enable it. So right now, if you see, in employee hire business process, there's no tab called paid FT, right? However, once I enable that paid FT, where is it? Yeah. However, once I enable this paid FTE for a set of countries, whenever I'm hiring or staffing an employee in any one of those countries, I would also have this option to determine the paid FTE. So what it means is, even though this employee, let's say, is only 50% FTE, but then I want to determine his paid FTE as still 100% or 80%. So I want, even though he's only working 50%, I want his paid FT or actual payment to be 100%. Right? Let me quickly check what is the location of this employee. He belongs to Netherlands. Uh, United States. I would enable it for a few countries. Now, this is not related to compensation as such. This, if you see, this comes under staffing, but just thought I would uh, mention this. So now if I go to worker history, and let's see, I'm not sure if I'm correcting it, it will show me. I'm assuming it would. Yeah. So if you see, now it shows me that paid FT as well. So if I select this checkbox, right, I can define what should be his paid FT. So even though his actual FT is 50%, his he should be paid 80%, let's assume, of his salary, right, and not 50%. And then system would use this FT value for his proration and his salary calculations, right? There's another concept which is working FT. I'm not, I don't think. Okay, this is not related to compensation in uh, any manner, right? So this is an enhancement which I think just came in Workday 32, and these are two additional FTs that you can track apart from the actual FT which is calculated by Workday, right? Um, okay, so let me also mention this. So in maintain localization settings, and under that in staffing, I have this paid FTE, right? And as we have seen, if enabled, right, Workday then doesn't use that normal calculated FTE for prorating, but it uses this paid FTE. So Workday prorates uh, salary and other plans, right, using the paid FTE. Okay. Uh, so I have selected this to be 80%. Let me submit this. Okay. Okay. So now his paid FTE is 80%. Let me now go ahead and initiate uh, compensation for the employee once again. Let me add this salary plan amount, let's say 100. Now if you see, the amount is not prorated to 50, rather it is prorated to 80, right? Because the paid FTE of the employee is 80% and not 50%, right? Okay, so that was your paid FTE. And as I mentioned, where all would Workday use this? Uh, Workday prorates salary plan using the prorate FTE during staffing and compensation change business processes, right? So you hire, your change job, all those business processes, system would use the value of these FT. Okay, let me remove this. So what did we say? Workday determines all the compensation plans that are assigned to base pay to calculate the percentage of the employee. Okay, what else did we see? Let's come back to our salary plan, which we had created. So apply FT percentage, exclude from merit, the compensation element, and the eligibility criteria, right? And that is all that we need to do to select compensation element, and finally assign the eligibility rule. Okay, any questions on any of these aspects that we have discussed?
So, one small question, like let's say somebody is having a zero point 0.5 FT and
Hmm.
earning, let's say, $1,000. So,
Okay.
and from 1st of July, his FT got changed to 1 FT, like full 100% FT.
Mm-hmm.
So, his compensation will get updated from 1st of July, effective of 1st of July, right?
I
Suppose,
didn't get that. So I am point 0.5 FT till 29th of Feb, right? And from 1st of
uh,
March, you're saying?
yes, let's take that example. It's first
Okay,
from 1st of March, his FT, he is now full 100% FT.
right.
So
Okay.
how does that change of BP will impact the compensation? Let's say he is earning after proration, he
Mm-hmm.
was earning $1,000
Right.
per month.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
what will happen to compensation from March?
Okay. Right. So in compensation, system would automatically show me or automatically prorate. Okay, let's take this example, right? So till 29th of Feb, as you mentioned, employee was point 0.5, and then he went full time from 1st of March, right? And this happened because of some change job that was processed on the employee, right? Now as part of the change job,
Right.
eh, you would also process this compensation change. So any, even though this is a new employee, guys, uh, and I am initiating this request compensation change for an employee, but ideally, not ideally, any new employee, when you are hiring him, you'd not assign him compensation using request compensation change. You do that, and I'm sure you guys can also check in the business processes configured in your system.
Right.
It is propose compensation higher, right? So here, just
Right.
as an example, I used it. Similarly, whenever you're initiating a change of for an employee, uh, this is included as a sub process within change job, right? And when system reaches this change job, and when this change job is submitted, even though there's no change in employee salary, so earlier let's say it was 2000, and because it was prorated by employees point 0.5, he was getting 1000. Now in change job, I do not do any changes, right? I just submit it. System would automatically recalculate the value of all the plans from point 0.5 to 1. So this plan, it would automatically be recalculated to 2000 instead of 1000, which was done with the point 0.5 FT. And from March onwards, from March 1st onwards, system would show the assignment of 2000 against his salary plan and not 1000, right? So those, any of those calculations, let's say not even 1st of March, till 14th of March I was zero point 0.5, and from 15th of March I became zero point 0.8 FT. So system, ultimately when my compensation is processed to my payroll, from 1st till 14th of March, I would be paid $1,000, 1000 divided by uh, 30 into 14, right, for that duration. So probably around $500 for the first 15 days, and the remaining 15 days I am zero point 0.8 FT. So it will give me some around $800. So instead of $2,000, I'll get around 1,300 or $1,400 for this whole month. So system automatically recalculates my compensation based on the number of days I have been assigned to a given plan, and in a given FTE range. Makes sense? Answers your question?
Yeah. So the all the payroll integration will receive the correct value,
Correct, correct,
right?
correct. Right, right.
Okay. Okay.
So even if you have Workday payroll, uh, that would any which ways be handled properly. And even if you have an external payroll, uh, through your payroll integrations, system would process and send two different records for the employee, saying that from this day to this day he's XFT, and from that day to that day he's YFT, as an example, right? So this is any which ways the basis of any HR system, not just Workday. You're dealing with any HR system. uh, uh, this date and effective date is one of the basic concepts of any HR system. All right. So
And
that
another
was.
point was
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, go ahead.
we could see some security segment options over the
Yeah.
salary plans and grade
Yes.
plans.
Right. 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 So I think I had asked about this at the beginning, and I believe you guys mentioned that you
We
guys
have
are
an
aware.
idea of segmentation, but
Yeah.
yeah,
But
we
okay.
have a basic idea of segment, but how that we are going to use that?
Yeah. Yeah. No
Some
problem.
quick examples will help.
I would cover that as well. No, that is fine. That is fine. So all segment-based security for compensation, whether it is salary plan or allowance plan, or any other plans, it follows the same basic process. I'll talk about how these different segments are created and how these are enabled. Right? I how a compensation segment security is enabled. See, not all enterprises, in one of the projects I've worked with, or in fact a couple of projects I've worked with, they were not using this compensation based security segments, right? In which case they had not enabled it, and this would not even show up, right? In this tenant it is enabled, and that is why it is showing up. So we'll see how you enable this segment, and then we'll talk about this compensation segment security in detail. This is relatively simple because you guys already know security, but no issues, we'll cover this in detail. Okay, I'll not save this salary plan. If you see, there are quite a few plans already in system, and that is why I'm not going to save it, right? I would just cancel this. All right. So we have now looked at compensation grade, compensation guidelines. So we have spoken about grade profiles, and we have looked at eligibility rules. We have looked at salary plan, right? In our next class, we'll talk about compensation steps. Now, not all organizations have compensation steps, right? This is a completely optional configuration. Uh, you would only so only certain industries, for example, in certain countries they have these union jobs. So only union jobs, your government jobs, only in those scenarios you configure these compensation steps. But then in most of the corporate industries that we deal with in today's world, a compensation step is not configured, right?